try to stop a car or a truck with your body, and you might get killed. If you expect busy commuters to join you in your protest/riot, you could get hurt. Today on The 10th Man. Today on The 10th Man, a basic lesson in cause and effect. If you sit or stand in the street, you might get run over, especially if you're doing it to antagonize others. Bad behavior gets people killed, and recent examples are going to require the law to side with the driver, not the disruptor. Now, I'm not a lawyer, just a content creator, but it's just my opinion. Someone's going to get run over, and the driver won't be charged. Florida Sheriff Wayne Ivey recently made headlines with some plain talk. He said, if you block an intersection or roadway in Brevard County, that's in Florida, of course, you're going to jail. And if you mob a car, surround it, and prevent the driver from leaving, you're most likely going to get run over and dragged across the street. And that's not an idle threat. It's a warning of your legal risks that result from bad behavior. And it reflects Florida law. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has said the same thing. Motorists have rights. Protesters and rioters don't get to suspend the rights of others just because they're holding a sign. The public has been operating under a false assumption that drivers must yield to these mobs, that because pedestrian right-of-way laws exist, motorists have to sit there and take it. But those laws are for people crossing a street. They're not for political stunts. The rioters' right to free speech doesn't include the right to force others to listen, or worse, to obey them. The First Amendment protects their right to speak, not to detain others. Real protest allows you to express your views, but it doesn't allow you to hijack someone else's morning commute. When drivers are surrounded and feel threatened, the law has to recognize that they may act out of self-preservation. And we'll show you cases of drivers who acted out who had no excuse, and it ended up that the person rammed was the one being charged. Now let's walk through this by date. 1992, the LA riots. No, the other LA riots, the Rodney King riots. And the lesson here is not about drivers getting away with anything. It's about what happens when they do not keep moving. These riots show exactly why stopping is dangerous. Time and again, the victims were those motorists who stopped for rioters. They were obeying the law, showing restraint, and they paid the price. Take Reginald Denny. In 1992, during the LA riots, he slowed down for a mob at Florence and Normandy streets, and he was pulled from his truck. He had his head bashed in with a brick and an oxygen tank, while a news helicopter recorded it live. His attackers, they danced over his bleeding body, mocking him and humiliating him. It was attempted murder, televised. One guy stepped over him using his head as a stepping stone, then turned around and soccer kicked it. Or you might ask Choi Sai-Choi, a Hong Kong immigrant, the legal kind. Same riots, same intersection, dragged out of his car and beaten. Again, he stopped, and he paid for it. Tam Tran, a 34-year-old Vietnamese woman motorist, was robbed and struck in the head with a brick. Larry Tarvin was stopped and beaten while trying to deliver medical supplies. The medical supplies later used to beat Reginald Denny in the head. Sylvia Castillo, on the other hand, was attacked but managed to speed away. Fidel Lopez, a construction worker, stopped, and he was dragged out of his truck, robbed, stripped naked, and had his face and genitals spray painted with black paint. And there's no ambiguity here. These attacks were brutal and racially charged. But to the credit of the same community, because we're not racist, some brave locals intervened. They pulled victims to safety and got them to hospitals. The police, however, they were nowhere to be found. When riots happen, you may be on your own. In LA in 1992, the police chief was at a fundraiser. Most of the precinct captains were attending a seminar, and mob rule filled in the void left by the police. Then there's 2014 in Detroit. A driver named Steve Utash, he stopped when a boy ran into the road and struck his truck. He got out to help and was mobbed by dozens of young men and beaten into a coma. 6 of them were identified and went to trial. 1 went to prison. The rest got probation. Now 2025, the present-day riots, again in LA. Now, I want to be clear, we don't have a perfect modern example of a motorist driving through protesters and getting away with it scot-free. But here's the twist. We don't need an example like that, because the examples we do have are even more extreme. And they tell us of motorists who rammed people with very little cause on their side. And the people who got rammed were held accountable. These are people who aggressively rammed police officers. And even then, the law bent over backwards to excuse it. Take Takia Young, 2023, Blendon Township, Ohio. She stole liquor from a Kroger store, a tote bag full, while pregnant, get that, then was sitting in her car with no license plates in a handicapped spot. Sounds like a real nice lady. When she was confronted by the police, she refused to answer questions, she refused to comply, and instead, she rammed them. One of the officers ended up on the hood. He fired his gun and killed her. He's now charged with murder and manslaughter. 2 counts because she was pregnant. Take Dennis Guider, 2021, Chicago Heights. He had a warrant for forgery. So when the car he was riding in was stopped by police, he forced the woman out of the driver's seat, took over, and rammed police officer Patrick McCarty, who was standing in front of him. McCarty was thrown onto the hood. Guider took off driving 50 miles an hour, swerving, trying to throw him off, and he did. McCarty was thrown off the car when it hit a ditch and broke his back. So what happened? The judge blamed the cop, saying it wouldn't have happened if he had just stepped aside. Guider wasn't a murderer, so McCarty should have just let him go. Now think that over, both of these examples. If that's what happens to a cop standing in front of a car with a criminal in it, then why should law-abiding drivers be expected to sit still, say a prayer, and just hope they survive? If criminals who violently ram police officers are met with excuses and sympathy, then surely a motorist trying to escape a threatening mob deserves at least as much consideration. If the law protects those who do worse, criminals, how can it condemn someone simply trying to survive? And that brings us to 2 recent cases in, you guessed it, Los Angeles. Same location, 3 decades later. In the summer of 2025, during yet another wave of street protests, 2 different motorists found themselves trapped. Both tried to flee and unfortunately struck and injured one of the mob, blocking each of them. One of these was later identified and charged with assault. The other fled the scene and is being hunted down for felony hit and run. Now let that sink in. Neither was provoking anything. Neither used a car to intimidate. They were just trying to escape. But Los Angeles never learns. It protects the criminals and punishes the people just trying to get home. Compared to our earlier examples, actual criminals, ramming cops, this is all backwards. But that's LA. And even there, as they say, it's still better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. It's still better to escape and then turn yourself in to law enforcement than it is to wait and be possibly murdered. Because these motorists may be charged, but at least no one beat their skull with a brick, an oxygen tank, and a hammer and then kicked it like a football, like in 1992. Outside of LA, however, attitudes are changing. Those 2 motorists in LA are being prosecuted, but this time they dared to test the system. If you doubt this, notice that even protest groups are catching on. The group Just Stop Oil is backing away from its road blocking tactics. Why? Because people are losing patience. But there's more to it than public backlash. These stunts aren't just a nuisance, they're a security risk. When a crowd in orange vests jumps out into traffic, there's no way for you to tell whether it's an activist group or an ambush. Looters and rioters are already using protests as a cover, so why not terrorists? A pop-up roadblock is a perfect setup to trap a motorcade or ambush an unsuspecting driver, perhaps a politician. But momentum is safety. Movement is life. When you're forced to stop, you're giving up the one thing that might save you. And if you think that couldn't happen, think again. Terror groups are watching. Disguises like orange vests have already been used as a cover for violence and deception. This masquerade isn't hypothetical, it's historical. Imagine a van of orange-vested protesters jumping out to block a U.S. government convoy. They may not walk away, nor should they. And if a government convoy doesn't stop, why should we? Blocking traffic isn't just protest, it's unlawful detention. It's intimidation. And it's dangerous for everyone. The politicians underscore this with irony. Representatives Maxine Waters and Rashida Tlaib cheer these tactics, but they don't use them. Even though Tlaib twice got arrested for sitting in the street and blocking traffic, and she boasts about it. But you don't see her doing that now. Representative Maxine Waters talks a big game, but never risks herself. Even they know the public is fed up. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but if the legal system finds ways to excuse violent criminals who attack police officers with vehicles, then why shouldn't we expect justice for the ordinary citizen caught in a mob and trying to flee? Protesters have the right to speak, but rioters don't have the right to entrap. And if people like Rashida Tlaib and Just Stop Oil, who once proudly blocked streets, won't do it anymore, maybe that tells you something. Tell a friend about the 10th Man podcast. That's how we grow. And thanks for listening.